2, 1. Good unspecified time period. And welcome to Richard and Karl Presents Deep Space and Dragons. I'm the Richard.
And I am the Karl.
Alright, so to start us off, let's go into what's new in the Karlverse. Although I do have to mention, after our last video, I got a question about the specifications of this sandblaster, because I may have overhyped how dangerous this machine would be and got some comparisons that you're trying to become real-life Gara of the Funk. So please, elaborate.
So you buy like an off-the-shelf air compressor and attach a hose, and then there's a valve kit that you can attach to the hose, obviously, and to that you attach a 3/32 of an inch brass pipe, which runs through a plastic container of some sort to contain your sand. You file a hole in the bottom of the brass pipe or brass tube, so that the sand can be picked up as the air compressor blows through. And I didn't really look at the cubic feet per minute, or CFM, of my air compressor, but in terms of power, the air compressor only has like 2 horsepower.
Okay. So it'd be the equivalent of building a machine that kicks yourself in the face with 2 horses.
Well, I mean, I suppose it could. I mean, it obviously with physics, it'll lose a lot of power just pushing the air through the sand and pushing it out. But I think I had mentioned last time that baking soda can be used as a sandblasting agent. And the video that I watched in particular, he was using baking soda as a sandblasting agent to sandblast fossils that he found on the beach.
Okay.
So it's gentle enough to sandblast, sand off of fossils without destroying the fossils.
Okay. Because in my brain, forgive me, but your luck stat may be higher than mine, but I'm used to random acts of misfortune. So in my brain, you're like, well, baking soda, non-dairy creamer, it's the same thing. They're both white powders. Shoots out of compressed air cannon. It ignites. Massive fireball happens. Saskatchewan is gone in its entirety. The children sing. This is how the scenario played out in my brain.
I know. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with what mucking gloves are, but basically, I have a plastic tub. And there will be holes cut into the side to put mucking gloves through, so that you have gloves in the side of the cabinet. And so then the sandblasting space itself is completely encased in a plastic box with a vent in the back that's covered with weed control fabric as a filter to make sure that no sufficiently small pieces of particles get out of the box while still letting the airflow, so that the pressure difference doesn't cause problems.
Alright. So, that sounds like, I'm not sure if any other What's New of Karl's come up, but we did get a lovely lecture on sandblasters.
I mean, homemade sandblasters. I did have one thing that another interesting thing I wanted to mention, which is, I was told by a friend that if you want to get cheap power tools, you should buy them from pawn shops. So I went to a pawn shop to buy some power tools, and I found a kit that had a skill saw, a jigsaw, a drill, and a flashlight for $85. So I bought them, brought them home, and then I realized they were some sort of European brand, circa 2004, which is probably part of the reason they were at the pawn shop. But the saws in particular, when under load, drain the batteries way too quickly to actually be useful. So I went out and I bought some, like laptop power cords with that
Yes,
like the barrel plug design.
I'm familiar. Yep.
Yeah, you can just buy those barrel plugs, and then you can just buy a adapter for the correct size and polarity of your barrel plug. Uh, Assumably, most people use them to replace like power supplies for security systems or laptops. But regardless, I plan on using these barrel plugs to make my strange European power tools, uh, battery operated power tools, into corded power tools. Haha.
That is
And they actually arrive.
hilarious. I
They're pretty
respect
cool.
the reverse Wi-Fi here. Like the classic, well, I've got this beautiful wired controller, and a battery keeps dying, so I plugged it in. Now it's wired, like it's an achievement.
Well, and then using the same barrel plug for different tools means I only need one power cord.
Well, well played. I'm just gonna well played this one. Excellent.
But I haven't had a chance to actually install said barrel plugs yet, which is part of the reason I haven't made much progress on my sandblaster because I need to cut some stuff.
Fair enough.
What's new with Richard?
All right. So, first, in my Mario Maker endeavors, I remade the movie John Wick.
You'll have to elaborate.
All right. So it starts with you walking through a sad haunted house while sad music plays. Then a Koopa drops down a Yoshi egg from above and a heart emoji plays because you were gifted a dog. You then go on a track course where you run around on your Yoshi, much like in John Wick where he drove around with his dog in the side seat. But you look in the wall and you see one of the Koopalings, and then you go through a door. You're forced to watch a cutscene where the Koopaling kills your Yoshi.
Oh,
You then go into a tunnel to your basement and do a spin jump to break a bunch of bricks to get yourself every Mario power-up. I then accurately recreated to the best of my ability in 2D platforming Super Nintendo technology every single kill count that's in the listed infographic for the kill count of John Wick, so you do murder enough Bowser minions to accurately match the movie before having a one-on-one showdown on a bridge.
huh.
I was very proud of my cutscene where the Koopaling throws a bouncy ball to hit a block to kill your Yoshi, so you have to watch it happen while a timer goes. And I really appreciate using the spin jump to dig up your basement floor in your little block house to get your weapons to go on a Yoshi rampage.
That does sound pretty amusing.
Well, I learned that pretty much any Mario level has already been replicated by somebody in Mario Maker, so I decided to try and do a movie.
So the Super Mario Land 2 strategy didn't work out because that's already been sort of done.
Not only has it been done, they found that if you equip certain sound effects, you can turn the graphics black and white, and they literally just made Mario Land.
Oh,
Yeah, it was just better. I was low-key disappointed. Let's see.
aggregated power of the internet.
And of course, because I'm me, I've accidentally become a club administrator for the college's D&D club.
Accidentally.
I just can't help it. I'm very efficient. I'm like, okay, we need a Discord server for this group. Okay, now we need a Discord server for the D&D group so people can communicate. Oh, you guys are doing it all wrong. I built you little subgroups for each group to communicate. Here's the resources. What do you mean my name's on the club administrator form? Well, that tracks. It's like I went from having zero intention of running this thing to, I'll probably have to run a game next week. Because if I don't,
probably.
they'll have to fumble through it themselves. And I don't want anyone to have a bad role-playing experience if I can help it.
Fair enough.
And this isn't about narcissism. This is about 4 years of solid failing upward to require the skill set to run D&D.
Yeah, some people are definitely need some help to understand the dynamics of what D&D is all about. Because there's the three pillars: the role playing, exploration, and combat. But if you focus too heavily on any one element, there's not enough variety, and people often end up losing interest or having a bad experience because they think that D&D is all about combat, or they think that D&D is all about role playing, and they don't realize that they're only getting 1/3 of the experience.
Or in my case, when I did a drop-in D&D at my local game shop, a player literally is like, "Oh, this is an unkillable enemy that you cannot possibly defeat." Thanks, game. Let's pull the old Japanese RPG trope of here's an unkillable boss battle that you have to fight, that you can't possibly win, and it's scripted. Haha. But I'm going to use that to segue into our main topic today, where we're going to be exploring the fun, exciting world of martial arts through video games, animation, comic books, mangas, and a few real-life experiences. But tune in to the end of the episode for this week's Random Question of the Week and Dragon Question of the Week to learn how you could win a free deluxe digital copy of the Waltz of Blades. So, I think with that deep dive, I'm going to start with a simple question, and anyone in the comments can feel free to elaborate on this. When was the first thing, Karl, what do you think is the first instance of someone putting their hands together, yelling, and a projectile of energy shooting out of their hands?
Well, I mean, I get the feeling. Now, this is probably some personal bias. I'm a fan of Akira Toriyama's work, he being the author of Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z.
Pause.
But
I do have to
Dr.
interject
Slump.
here. No,
Pardon?
you can tell someone's a true Akira Toriyama fan when they list Dr. Slump first. I needed to interject with that. You may resume.
Well, Dr. Slump is the precursor to Dragon Ball, and the main character, Aurelie, is a robot, and she definitely uses ki-like blasts, which was a theme that then continued onward into Dragon Ball. And the Dragon Ball anime was released in 1986, where Street Fighter, with its famous Hadouken, was released in 1987. So I would suggest that Akira Toriyama is quite possibly one of the forerunners of energy blasts that come from your hands, particularly in the form of the Kamehameha, because that's just been popularized and copied in all sorts of media.
Okay. I mean, you're definitely right. The Kamehameha is one of the more iconic ones. And, sorry, what year did you say Dragon Ball came out again?
The anime was released in 86, where the original Street Fighter was released in 87.
Okay, because the Fist of the North Star manga was 1983, and I think there was a bit in it, but it happened later on, where the main character fights a villain who's shooting ki blasts. He's like, ki blasts are dumb because you're wasting energy, just punch that hard. But I don't know if that predates the Dragon Ball manga. I don't think it does.
Well, I mean, and then the other thing too is that a lot of the concepts and styles for Dragon Ball came from Dr. Slump, which was also released before Dragon Ball.
Alright, so Dragon Ball came out in 1984. Fist of the North Star came out in 1983, which was more martial arts focused, grittier, dark style. It actually looks closer in tone to what you would expect out of a DC comic than you'd expect out of a manga. Like, the eye proportions are actually human. The ink line is dark and heavy. Like, it's actually closer, I'd say, to looking at a superhero show than what typical anime looks like these days. But I don't know if he did not ki blast before Goku, though, because that was Chapter 4, when he fired the first Kamehameha. Feel free to correct me, Dragon Ball is your jam.
No, I'm pretty sure you're right. That's because he does learn the Kamehameha fairly early on. The first plot arc runs through pretty quickly. There's a pretty dramatic shift in tone. Firstly, like between Fist of the North Star and Dragon Ball, for both being about martial arts. Fist of the North Star is definitely way grittier, and adult me appreciates the random exploding people and that kind of gore. I'm not a big fan of like Saw kind of gore where it's like self-inflicted, but
Yeah.
I am a fan of people exploding.
Because, yeah,
Uh,
there's two types of gore. There's your gore because awesome action sequence, where to give one of the more contemporary martial arts movies, John Wick is a beautiful gun fu movie. And
oh,
the
for sure.
and the violence in that movie is justified, rational, cinematic violence. The Saw
Mhm.
style torture porn where you're just watching bad things happen to people just because, nah, that's not my style. I don't endorse it. But assembling an old tiny gun to shoot someone with it, then to throw it, then grabbing an axe and shurikening that across the room, magnifique.
Uh, I mean, just within the genre of martial arts, it is pretty interesting. Like, that gritty, super violent style versus like the more upbeat and comedy type style of Dragon Ball, and then specifically going on to Dragon Ball Z, where it's still about martial arts and it is more serious, but it still doesn't quite have that grit of John Wick or Fist of the North Star.
I mean, Dragon Ball around between like the Saiyan to Cell sagas got pretty Fist of the North Star. Like even the art style is becoming more and more of the the humanoid proportions, the bothering to actually draw muscles. Like I saw a meme picture the other day, which was Vegeta in the baseball episode of Dragon Ball Super. Spoiler alert, there's a baseball episode in Dragon Ball Super. Dragon Ball somehow has always had better filler than main show. It's the only thing to boast that claim in all of manga, anime, and TV shows. And there's a bit where sometimes the draw's arm is just like a straight noodle. And then other times it's super detailed musculature. And that's the power of being a gag series, is you can just whimsically change it up and no one bats an eye.
Yeah, that's true. Uh, but speaking of gag series that have martial arts, One Punch Man, also a very interesting series. Um, I'm not really sure if I enjoy where it's going at the moment, but uh, there was that whole arc where One Punch Man decides to learn what the deal is with martial arts because he's become so strong that nothing matters. And, uh, that was just another amusing segue to
Oh yeah,
some of the characters are doing all sorts of like fancy, pointless moves.
and he just punches a guy and it's much more effective. But then he's disappointed because he wants to do the cool backflips and the awesome hand to hand. Like, it was a very nice segue there that One Punch Man does a very good deconstruction of a lot of anime and manga tropes while being an anime and manga trope. So, on the topic of martial arts, what would you say is the first show you remember that had martial arts depicted?
Um, I would probably say Inuyasha, actually.
Huh.
I mean, it's not exactly martial arts, but like Koga with his the Shikon jewels in his legs, and he runs around really fast and he kicks people a lot. He's very martial artsy for sure.
It's crazy. Like,
Um,
if I'm to go back, I think the first time I heard the term martial arts was probably Power Rangers.
uh, but my parents also loved that show, Kung Fu.
Oh, I was going to pivot into that. The terror. Like, if you watch it now, you'd definitely have to put a cultural sensitivity tag, like Marvel Studios does for their older properties, of this was made with cultural situations that were reflecting of the era they're in. It's like, you mean racism? Well, we don't want to say that, but yeah, a little bit.
Well, I mean, uh, on the flip side, I mean, I don't want to whitewash other cultural staples, but uh, you know, anyone's allowed to be a martial arts master if
Oh,
they just put in the time and effort.
I agree completely. Like, one of my friends growing up, his family was from Hungary, and he was super into martial arts, got his black belt. And it's not a stereotype you see by any
Mhm.
means. And there's nothing that stops you from learning as long as you treat the source material with respect, or conversely, and this is my thoughts on parody of general, if you treat nothing with respect, you're also in the clear. You have to either treat everything with respect or nothing. It's when you don't balance your respect that you start running into problems.
But yeah, Kung Fu was definitely. I think that was the earliest reference I heard to martial arts because that was just something my parents liked. They also like my mom also liked Steven Seagal movies. And he did a lot of fisticuffs.
That is fair. You know what was a fantastic thing that's coming out? So I'm super hesitant whenever Netflix says they're adapting something.
Hmm.
Because a Netflix adaptation, sometimes it's just them putting a sticker on something and being the people who release it. Sometimes they make something fantastic like The Witcher. And other times they make Winx Club the live action show. But they're releasing a live action Cowboy Bebop. Did you ever go through Cowboy Bebop?
No, I did not.
So first off, how did that happen? Like, you're the person who suggested Samurai Champloo to me, I believe, but never actually watched Cowboy Bebop. Which are weird.
Oddly enough, I never actually watched Samurai Champloo either. When I was younger, I would look up cool mangas and animes and be like, okay, well, I mean, these got to have cool soundtracks. So then I would, download music from them.
Fair enough. And Cowboy Bebop was a bop, literally. So they're doing their live action. They wanted actual martial artists to do it. And you can tell they're
Okay.
telling the truth because they had to delay production from a year because their lead actor destroyed his kneecap and
Ooh,
needed surgery.
yeah.
But I watched what might be my favorite interview of all time where they're discussing the female lead. And in the original, they picked a character that was 6 feet tall with probably double E sized, you get the idea, and a 2-inch waist. So they said in the interview, yeah, we tried to find this person, but it turns out if you're anatomically shaped like that, you would die. So they went with me instead, an actual trained athlete who's a little shorter. Also, they gave me an outfit not made of tissue paper so I can actually do martial arts in it without the outfit exploding. And I have so
Oh,
much respect for that. Don't even.
I, I thought that that was what anime martial arts was half all about. Was people's clothes getting destroyed,
Perfect
male
seg.
or female. It doesn't really matter. Clothes get destroyed if there's martial arts involved.
First off, that is the most nonsensical thing ever because you're right. But you would think that martial arts would be like the least clothes destructing sport. Like, when in shows like, let's take My Hero Academia, for example, a superhero series, where people are shooting fire, lightning, and acid at each other. Their clothes usually survive. But if you punch
Yeah.
real hard, your clothes explode. Which is the segue into the deep tragedy that is how poorly history's greatest disciple Kenichi aged. So, one of
Oh,
my favorite animes when I was growing up was Kenichi the Mightiest Disciple, where they took the concept of the Karate Kid. You're like, you know what would make the Karate Kid better? If we grabbed a tutor from every martial art we could think of across the world, threw them in a martial arts studio, and just took the Karate Kid and animated the crap out of it.
mm,
And I loved it. But unfortunately, the problem that didn't age well is they decided that female characters' clothes in this must explode, and they must have body types that do not match being a martial artist in any way, shape, or form.
yeah, that's true.
So I have this.
Uh,
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say that like female characters in History Disciple Kenichi, they're incredibly powerful, but they definitely don't have the muscular toning that actual martial artists tend to have. But then the male characters are just like jacked and ripped, and it's kind of an interesting example of sexism in media, I suppose.
And it's unfortunate because I'd love a remake of the series because the core idea of the basic premise of this is you had a nerdy kid getting bullied, and then through coincidence meets a super martial artist classmate who instructs him to go through effectively the plot of the Karate Kid as an infinite loop where he gets stronger, so he fights off his bullies to stand up for himself, which encourages stronger bullies to fight him. And this loop goes through until eventually at some point he's literally fighting the Shadow League of Assassins. From the natural progression of every time you beat somebody up, someone stronger will come challenge you. And the characters in it even tell him this as he's going through it. Like, oh yeah, we're teaching you martial arts, and each thing we teach you, you'll become a bigger target for more people, and you'll either be the strongest by the end of this or be dead. So the core concept was fantastic, and had some interesting research where they really tried to, like, bring in fighting styles from around the world, and they seem to be pretty accurately researched, despite the
Hmm.
anime shenanigans where they do end up with the classic anime fireball shooting by the end of it,
Right.
where a character claps their hands together and blows up a tank, and then they try and explain, like, oh no, that was just air pressure and rapid movement. It's like, no, he blew up a tank. No.
Well, I mean that is the same character that punched a nuclear bomb and explode.
First
So
off, that was
and
fantastic.
survive.
That was a beautiful scene. Like, there's so much stuff I enjoyed in that I would love an adaptation where they simply had a female editor, read it and maybe give some feedback, because I'm mildly concerned that Shonen Jump Studios hasn't employed a human female in about 20 years.
Yeah, they only employ robotic females.
That's concerning. But on to the topic of martial arts. I'm going to pivot into Gun Fu. Did you ever see Equilibrium, the original Gung Fu movie?
I have not. I'll put that on my to watch list.
So it was basically what brought the premise of, if you're a super martial artist, you can look at a gun barrel, figure out where the bullet's going to be, and do awesome gunfighting with it.
Hmm. They did kind of have Rurouni Kenshin early on in the manga. There's the character that tries to shoot him with a gun, and he doesn't deflect the bullet, but he catches it on his handguard because he's able to predict the trajectory before the bullet is shot.
Which is definitely a classic, because you need to use some writing devices for your character who punches and kicks people to win a fight against someone with a gun. Like, recently I was watching the live-action Titans show, which is Teen Titans, but they decided to go dark and edgy. They've made it successfully to Season 3, and they're adapting the classic Batman plot arc, the Red Hood. There's other characters there, too. They really don't matter this season. It's all about Batgirl, Nightwing, and the Red Hood. The other characters are there, but they exist because the show needs them to. And there's a fight between Nightwing, which, spoilers, Nightwing is Robin. So Nightwing's fighting Red Hood, right? And he has sticks with little tasers on the end and is just a dude in a bodysuit with batons. And he's fighting...
Well, just as a quick question, also spoilers, isn't Red Hood also a different Robin?
Yes, he is the tragic Robin that got beaten to death by a crowbar because of a fan voting whether they should keep that Robin alive. Which is the most messed up thing in DC history. Now, I need to do a little segue on this. They literally had a fan contest where he wrote in whether or not the Joker beat the new Robin to death, and fans voted for the Joker to violently beat the new Robin to death. That's the thing that happened. Is a fictional character got public executed by popular opinion. He got mob lynched in the real world, which got him beaten to death in a comic book. So
yeah, I mean then obviously he was not actually dead, because the plotter comes back where Red Hood is just a crazy version of that character.
Yeah, because magic resurrection pits. But what's really funny is the first Robin is so much better in combat than the second Robin that the second Robin has guns and lost. So we have two normal humans with no superpowers that went through identical training, and one is so better than the other that guns did not make it a fair fight. The guy with sticks won, and it just made me laugh. It's like, oh, you brought machine guns and lost. You should really go home and rethink your life.
That is pretty sad.
Like, that's one of the things that has me so excited about Cowboy Bebop, is it has guns, but it definitely does the gun fu style, kick a gun out of someone's hand and do an awesome spin kick to their head style combat, and I love it. I love when you can be good enough at martial arts that the person with the machine gun should win, but it's so much cooler when they don't.
That is definitely true.
But to go into some classic martial arts goodness, Street Fighter 2, homage to other cultures or blatant racism?
Well, I mean, the cultural society at the time, it's if you wanted representation for other cultures like that, you kind of were forced to stick with the stereotypes. So it's like these stereotypes that are no longer socially acceptable were actually the earliest forms of representation for those types of people.
It's kind of crazy to think about. Like, let's take Dalsum, for example, in Street Fighter 2, who literally yelled out Yoga Fire and shot fire and could teleport. That is
Mhm.
objectively a harmful stereotype in today's culture. But
Uh,
what if it was your first piece of representation of your group in a video game? And it resulted in people trying to learn more about this culture, which was poorly represented in this game.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like lots of people actually did a ton of research and were inspired by what are offensive stereotypes by modern standards, but it really let people know that these cultures exist outside of their own. I mean, it was also pre like internet and stuff, so a lot of people were less exposed to those sorts of things in the first place. But
Yeah, it's an interesting. It was crazy though, is because it's been going for so long. These characters still exist. They're still in games, and their solution isn't to change these characters, but to add in more and more characters with more and more diverse qualities. Because if you only have one Russian character in your story, and he's Zangief, that means you're saying that is what all Russians are like. If you put
mm,
in three Russian characters and one Zangief and two are just other people with different hopes and dreams and characteristics, then Zangief isn't a problem. Because you can be Russian and Zangief as long as you show that that's not what you believe all people to be from that group.
uh, yeah, I mean, like that's kind of an example of how a stereotype helped evolve into a more sensitive representation of martial arts and different cultures, for sure. I mean, it's still not perfect by any means, but it's definitely striving to be better.
Agree. And on that note, I think we're going to give a nice little soft recap here for our show, and then head into our dragon question and random question of the day. So, today we went over how to build a sandblaster. Disclaimer: if you're going to build a power tool, make sure to do the appropriate research, be it an adult, and take every safety precaution you can.
Hmm.
We went into role playing games for a little bit, and how instructing people in it is how you can keep your game the quality you want it to be.
Hmm.
And then we decided to discuss where did the Hadoken come from, some various animes, mangas, and video games that discussed fighting, dabbed into racial politics, which is a terrifying topic to jump into. And with that, we have managed to make it to our dragon question of the week that comes in from one of our viewers. Who or what is your favorite dragon character? Oh, wait, no, we did that last week.
That was definitely last week.
Alright, so I am freezing at a moment trying to find my question for the day. So, instead, I'll throw to you for our random question. Karl, let's have you do this week's random question of the week. What do you got for us?
Ooh, you want me to ask a random question?
Yeah?
Um. Okay. My random question would be, when I say the word labyrinth, what type of maze do you think of?
Oh, that's a very good one. Because when I first hear Labyrinth, I immediately think David Bowie. And I go
Yeah.
straight to Minotaurs, Underground, sometimes shapeshifting. And then I pivot to the Maze card from Card Captors, where it's like a self-aware hedge mage is a labyrinth. Because I think the difference between a maze and a labyrinth is the level is not only the degree of challenge, but a labyrinth will typically have not puzzles that aren't just part of a maze, where a maze is just the structure of the shape. So what
I
do you
mean,
think?
so there's actually a website that you can use to find so-called labyrinths around the world, and there are at least two worth mentioning in Saskatchewan. One being someone painted a maze on the floor of their house, and they consider that a labyrinth, which I'm not really too big on that one. That's just a maze on the floor. And number two was like a serenity maze of some sort, where it's just like a rocks formed into a maze, but you're supposed to like meditate as you're going through this maze, and it's kind of like an honor system, but I mean, it's supposed to help you clear your mind. But when I think of labyrinth, I definitely think of like a fully enclosed space, and definitely the first thing that comes to mind is Minotaurs, and David Bowie's kind of a second place in my mind. But uh, you know,
I'm just
David Bowie's pretty awesome too.
fair enough. So here's our Dragon question of the week because I managed to vamp for enough time to find it. So, out of every video game, anime, comic book, card game, what have you, what is your favorite attack with the word dragon in it?
Well, I mean, I am definitely a sucker for Dragon Ball, and um, when Goku fights King Piccolo, there's a pivoting moment where he kicks one of his minions in the head, and the brains explode, and it's like very surprising gore for the series. But that's just the beginning of the fight. The end of the fight ends up with the iconic Dragon Fist, where he just like uses the Kamehameha to launch himself to the sky and punches straight through King Piccolo. And nostalgia, that's my favorite dragon attack.
That is fair. So I'm not going to immediately go to Dragon Ball. So first, I'm going to go with not my favorite, but an honorable mention. Is even though I'll never successfully pronounce a Street Fighter attack name on air, to the point where I'm not even going to try, his classic Dragon Uppercut has been used by characters in literally everything. The Shoryuken.
Hmm.
So that is probably the most iconic dragon named attack. However, I'm a fan of anime excess, so probably the anime fairy tale where he's like Dragon King Executor Dragon Style Dragon King Incineration Fist, I think has the most uses of the word dragon in the name. But
Mm.
my favorite dragon attack is from Yu-Gi-Oh, where it's Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon White Lightning Attack, because it's a card game where a character feels the name to dramatically point and scream out an attack name before someone gets incinerated and blows up from a massive explosion caused from his trading card dragon.
Well, I mean, those holograms were real enough to push people off buildings, so
Like, oh man, Blue Eyes White Dragon White Lightning Attack. It's just iconic in my brain. Also,
for some
Seto.
reason,
Oh,
for some reason, I thought you were going to go with Saint. I don't know why.
sorry, I was going to go with what? You cut out there for a moment.
The Saint Seiya, like the dragon armor guy.
No way. So his is just a Shoryuken that makes your heart explode afterward. Like, it's just a
I,
Shoryuken.
I don't know why I thought you were going to go with Saint Seiya. I just thought that maybe that was nostalgia for you.
I mean, it was a good shout out. That was one of those martial arts series that came out after Dragon Ball. It was like, yeah, let's just do Dragon Ball's martial arts with none of the joy or fun in it. And it was adequate. And with that, you won yourself a free deluxe digital copy of the Waltz of Blades I will send to you later for submitting this questions of the week. Thank everybody for listening, and tune in next week. Take care and bye.
Ciao.